In every city, there are stories that never made the papers. Not because they weren't important, but because they were inconvenient. They live in forgotten files, in half-finished investigations, in questions no one wanted answered. This isn't where justice always wins. This is where the echoes remain. This is Reverberating Noir. There are nights that don't end. Not really. The calendar moves forward, the years stack up, the names fade from the headlines, but the night itself, it just keeps going. Welcome to Reverberating Noir.
Tonight we're going back to a place and a moment that most history books mention in passing, if they mention it at all. And that silence, that omission, is part of the story.
Greene County, Alabama. 1870. A man is taken from his room in the middle of the night, marched into the dark, and shot. His body is left where it falls, deliberately. Because the point was never just to kill him. The point was for everyone else to find him in the morning.
His name was Alexander Boyd. He was 35 years old. He was a lawyer, a Union Army veteran, and the county solicitor of Greene County, the prosecuting attorney. And he was killed, not in spite of those things. Because of them.
This is the story of one night, one man, and a system of terror so organized, so deliberate, that it didn't just end a life. It ended a version of America that was just beginning to exist.
And here's what makes this case still disturbing, more than 150 years later. What happened to Alexander Boyd wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as certain people intended it to.
Let's go back.
To understand the night of the 31st of March, 1870, you have to understand what Greene County was. It sits in Alabama's Black Belt rich soil, plantation country, and a majority black population. After the war, after the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, the political map of that county shifted almost overnight. Black men could vote. Former Confederates were disenfranchised. And for the first time in the history of that county, the people who had been owned were now casting ballots.
That's not a small thing. That's a tectonic shift. And the men who had run Greene County before the war, the planter class, the old guard, they felt it like an earthquake under their feet.
The Republican coalition that emerged was fragile but real. Freedmen, Northerners who'd come south, a handful of white Southerners who believed in the new order. And it was producing results. Black men serving on juries, holding office, sending children to school. It was imperfect, but it was democratic in a way that county had never been before.
And Alexander Boyd was part of the machinery that made it function. He was from Pennsylvania. He'd served as an officer in the Union Army. After the war, he came to Greene County, built a legal practice, got appointed as county solicitor. In that role, he was the man who prosecuted crimes, which meant he was the man standing between the old power structure and its ability to act with impunity.
That's the detail that matters most, Adam. He wasn't just a symbol. He was a functional obstacle. He had subpoena power. He could bring cases. He could put men in front of juries. And in a county where the Ku Klux Klan had established a deep and violent presence, a prosecuting attorney who was actually willing to prosecute was an existential threat.
The Klan in Greene County wasn't a fringe. That's something people need to sit with. It wasn't a collection of unstable individuals acting out of unchecked rage. It was organized. It had structure. It drew its membership from the planter class, educated men, men of standing, men who understood leverage and consequence. They used terror the way a general uses strategy, deliberately, toward a specific end.
And the end was simple. Dismantle the Republican government, suppress the black vote, return the county and eventually the state to democratic control. They called it redemption, which tells you everything about how they saw themselves. Righteous. Reclaiming something stolen, the language of victims, used by men committing organized political murder.
The night of the 31st of March, 1870. Utah, the county seat. A large group of men, disguised, moving together through the dark. They had specific targets. This wasn't a riot. It wasn't spontaneous. They had a list.
The first target was Judge William Miller, a white Republican. They went to his home, dragged him out, and beat him severely. He survived. Whether by luck or because they chose to let him live as a warning rather than a martyr, we can't say for certain. But he survived.
And then they moved to the boarding house where Alexander Boyd was staying. I want you to think about that moment. Boyd heard something, or he didn't. Maybe the door was sudden. Maybe there were voices first. He was taken from his room, marched out of town, a short distance into the dark, and shot.
His body was left where it fell.
That detail. They left the body. In a different kind of crime, you hide the evidence. You make it disappear. But this wasn't that kind of crime. They wanted the body found. They wanted the morning to bring that discovery. They wanted every person in Greene County who was thinking about continuing to vote, continuing to serve, continuing to believe. They wanted those people to understand what belief cost.
This is what the Equal Justice Initiative calls racial terror lynching, as distinct from mob violence. The distinction is critical. A mob is reactive, emotional, disorganized. What happened to Alexander Boyd was none of those things. It was targeted. It was systemic. It was designed to produce a specific political outcome. And it did.
The federal government wasn't blind to this. Congressional investigators came to Alabama. They took testimony. People in Greene County, residents, survivors, witnesses, they spoke. They told the truth about what they saw. That testimony exists. It's in the historical record, volumes of it. People risked their safety to go on record, and the government listened. For a while.
The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 was a genuine response. Federal prosecution authority. The ability to treat Klan conspiracies as federal crimes rather than local matters that Southern courts could quietly bury. There were prosecutions. There were convictions. The Klan's most visible activities were suppressed. And then the political will in Washington began to erode.
That erosion. That's the part that keeps me up at night, Nina. Not the violence itself, as monstrous as it was. But the moment when the people with the power to stop it decided it wasn't worth the effort anymore. The quiet retreat. The looking away.
Because here's the pattern that emerges when you study this period carefully. The Klan didn't need to maintain maximum violence indefinitely. They just needed to establish, clearly enough, what the consequences of resistance were. Kill enough of the right people at the right moments, and the rest of the population calculates the cost and adjusts their behavior accordingly. It's a brutal arithmetic, and it worked.
By the mid-1800s and 70s, Democrats had retaken Alabama's state government. The biracial Republican coalition that had governed Greene County, that had produced something genuinely new and democratic in that place, was gone. And the men who killed Alexander Boyd were never meaningfully held accountable. They went home, they lived their lives. Some of them probably lived long lives.
And this is where the case becomes something more than historical. Because what we're describing isn't just one murder in one county in 1 year. We're describing a template, a proof of concept. If you want to dismantle a democratic system, you don't need to defeat it in the open. You don't need to win the argument. You just need to make the cost of participation unbearable for the people who make the system function.
Prosecutors, judges, voters, the unglamorous machinery of democracy. The people who show up every day and do the work that makes self-governance real at the county level, the level where it actually touches people's lives. That's what they targeted. Not the idea of democracy, the people who made it work.
Boyd was a specific kind of threat because he was effective. Not radical, not inflammatory, effective. He understood the law, he used it. And in a system where the law had finally, tentatively, been extended to protect people it had never protected before, a competent, committed prosecuting attorney was genuinely dangerous to the old order. So they removed him.
Here's what most people miss when they encounter this case. They frame it as an act of racial violence. And it was, absolutely. But it was also something more specific than that. It was political assassination. Boyd was killed because of the office he held and the function he performed. His blackness made him a target in the broader context of white supremacist terror. But his role county solicitor, prosecuting attorney, that's what made him the target on that specific night.
And that distinction matters because it tells us something about the nature of the threat. This wasn't irrational hatred acting blindly. This was rational, strategic, organized power protecting itself by eliminating the specific individuals who posed the most direct institutional challenge. That's a different kind of frightening. That's frightening in a way that doesn't go away when the immediate perpetrators are gone.
Because the logic persists. The template persists. The idea that if you make democratic participation dangerous enough for candidates, for voters, for the people who administer elections, for the lawyers who prosecute violations, the idea that if you raise the cost high enough, the system hollows out from the inside. That idea didn't die in Greene County in 1870.
What followed Boyd's murder, the decades of Jim Crow, the systematic exclusion from political and economic life, the legal architecture of segregation, none of that was inevitable. It was constructed deliberately on a foundation that included nights like the 31st of March, 1870, and the men who built that foundation understood exactly what they were building.
There's something I keep returning to. Boyd made a choice. He didn't have to be in Greene County. He was from Pennsylvania. He'd survived the war. He could have gone home. Built a quiet practice somewhere safe. Lived a life that didn't put him in the crosshairs of organised violence. He chose to stay. He chose to serve. And we don't know why, not exactly. History hasn't preserved his letters or his private thoughts. What we have is the fact of his presence, and the fact of what that presence cost him.
And the fact that the people who killed him were never made to answer for it in any meaningful way. Witnesses testified, investigators came, laws were passed, and still, nothing that matched the scale of what was done.
That gap between what happened and what was answered, that's where the case still lives. That's what makes it not just history.
The historical record documents this case. The testimony exists. The pattern is clear. And yet, for most of the century and a half that followed, Alexander Boyd's name was not widely known. The men who killed him were not widely known. The county moved on. The state moved on. The country moved on. And the silence around what happened became its own kind of continuation of the original act. Erasure as the final phase of the operation.
Before we close tonight, if this kind of storytelling matters to you, if you believe these cases deserve to be heard and not forgotten, subscribe to Reverberating Noir. Every episode, we go into the dark places that history would rather leave quiet. We stay there long enough to understand what we're looking at, and then we bring it back into the light. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell us what you found in tonight's story. Because this work only continues if you're here for it. Alexander Boyd, 35 years old, county solicitor, Eutaw, Alabama, the 31st of March, 1870, taken from a room in the middle of the night, marched into the dark, shot, left where he fell. Some nights don't end, they just wait for someone to finally say the name out loud.
The men who killed him calculated correctly that they would not be held accountable. What I keep asking is this: what does it mean for a democracy when that calculation keeps proving right? That question doesn't have an answer yet. Which means the case isn't closed. It's just waiting.
The recording ends here, but the case doesn't. Somewhere, the evidence still exists. The questions still wait. If this story stayed with you, if it followed you into the silence, subscribe to Reverberating Noir. Not for us, for the stories that refuse to disappear.
Because as long as something doesn't make sense, the truth is still out there. And someone will find it.
Until next time, keep listening to the dark.